After spending the last 2 months protecting us from the coronavirus, the government has now turned to protecting us from the economic consequences of the shutdown. And if you're one of the millions without a job or your small business has gone bust, this is not before time. As Treasurer Josh Frydenberg told the National Press Club today, the cost of everything that's been closed to stop the spread of this disease, the shut cafes, the restaurants, the closed pubs and clubs, the empty gyms, the cessation of all team sport and mass entertainment, and the banning of all but local travel, the cost of all of that is a $4 billion hit to our economy every single week. Total spending in the economy is down 20% on the same time a year ago. The economy is now tipped to contract by at least 10% this quarter. Unemployment, well, it'll soar to at least 10% as well. And but for the government's JobKeeper payment, unemployment would have hit nearer 20%. For the first time in history, instead of trying to make the economy grow, governments have been deliberately shutting it down. But now, thank God, the government wants to start opening it up again. All credit to the government for keeping our corona deaths under 100 so far, thanks to an early ban on travel from China. I'm not one of those who's going to criticise the government's success. I would much rather be a Sydney or a Brisbane than a London or a New York here. But one of the problems with the government being so successful is that if in 6 months' time businesses are still closed, unemployment is still rampant and wealth is still vaporising, people might be more angry at the economic devastation than grateful for being saved. On Friday, the states will meet again with the PM as the National Cabinet charts a way out of these restrictions and back to normal life, or as normal as we're going to get, this side of a vaccine. Frustratingly, the lack of consistency with the scope of regulation state by state has been a real bugbear. There's also been different rules for different businesses, depending on where they're located, and all of that has only made it harder for the little guy to survive. Regardless of what happens to the economy from here, there's the staggering cost of all the government spending to date. JobKeeper alone, well, payments there are budgeted to cost $130 billion, or well over double the total Rudd government stimulus package to deal with a global financial crisis. The Treasurer was coy today too about debt and deficit. But with more than $200 billion of extra federal spending set to fall over this financial year and the next, it's hard to see any improvement on a succession of $100 billion plus deficits and debt approaching $1 trillion. As the Treasurer said, there's no place for ideology in the face of a crisis, and true. But let's not forget, all of this will still have to be paid for. And that's, of course, just the feds, who, thanks to 6 years of hard fiscal grind, were looking at small surplus budgets this year, absent the crisis. As for the states, all of them are increasing debt, led naturally enough by Victoria, which has borrowed an additional $50 billion under Daniel Andrews, $25 billion in the past week or so, mostly on the back of a 40% increase in the wages bill. Today, the Treasurer talked about a reform agenda, he said, quote, to recharge the economy, only to then lapse into the Prime Minister's talk of harvesting ideas rather than actually coming up with any new policies. He did talk about, though, some regulatory steps the government had taken in response to the current crisis, less regulatory hurdles on bank lending, allowing telehealth consultations under Medicare and permitting electronic lodgement of documents and virtual AGMs for companies over the next 6 months. Look, they're all worthy enough, but hardly a plan to unshackle the economy. There's no doubt the government's intentions are good, and even less doubt that Labor as an alternative would be terrible. But I fear that unless we get serious about serious reform, we'll be living with this gargantuan economic cost of coronavirus long, long after the disease itself has disappeared.